A successful businessman walked the streets on an ordinary day. He was marked by the loss of his great love 20 years ago. Suddenly, his path crossed with that of a beautiful florist. As he looked into her eyes, memories of the past resurfaced in his mind. Before you hear this tear-jerking story, remember to subscribe to the channel. The afternoon sun bathed the bustling streets of downtown New York, reflecting off the windows of skyscrapers and creating an almost blinding glow. Among the hurried crowd, Ethan Thompson walked with firm and determined steps, his impeccable suit and fine leather briefcase revealing his position as one of the city's most successful businessmen. At 45, Ethan was the embodiment of success. Owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, he had achieved everything money could buy. His face, though attractive, carried a serious, almost melancholic expression that not even his greatest professional triumphs could completely erase. As he crossed the busy Fifth Avenue, Ethan distractedly checked messages on his state-of-the-art phone. Meetings, contracts, numbers. His life was a constant race against time. Yet, something made him stop abruptly, nearly causing a collision, with a young executive coming up behind him. There, in the middle of the sidewalk, was a small flower shop he had never noticed before. It wasn't the establishment itself that caught his attention, but the woman delicately arranging a bouquet of red roses in the window. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her face was like an echo of the past, a long-buried memory suddenly coming to life before his eyes. Ethan felt his heart race, a sensation he hadn't experienced in 20 years. His hands began to tremble slightly, and he had to lean on a nearby pole to steady himself. The woman in the flower shop was identical to her, Sophia, his first and only true love, the one fate had so cruelly torn from his arms. Without realizing it, Ethan took a step toward the shop, as if drawn by an invisible force. The woman, feeling watched, looked up, and their gazes met. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. Ethan saw confusion in her eyes, as if something in her mind was trying to awaken a distant memory. "It can't be," Ethan murmured to himself, unable to look away. The woman, intrigued by the intensity of the stranger's gaze, offered a polite, though slightly hesitant smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic, exactly as Ethan remembered. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain the whirlwind of emotions overwhelming him at that moment? How could he tell this woman that she was the living image of the love he had lost 2 decades ago? I'd like a bouquet," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse and unsteady. "Of red roses, please." The woman nodded, still with that gentle smile on her lips. "Of course, I'll prepare it for you. Do you have a preference for a specific arrangement?" Ethan shook his head, unable to focus on such trivial details. His eyes scanned every inch of her face, desperately searching for a sign, any hint that she could be who he thought she was. As the florist prepared the bouquet, Ethan tried to reorganize his thoughts. It was impossible, he told himself. Sophia had passed away 20 years ago, the victim of a terrible car accident. He himself had been at the hospital, had held her. And as she... Ethan closed his eyes, pushing away the painful memory. When he opened them again, the woman was standing before him, offering him the most beautiful arrangement of red roses he had ever seen. "Here you go, sir," she said, handing him the bouquet. "I hope it's to your liking." Their fingers brushed briefly as Ethan took the flowers, and he felt an electric current run through his body. The woman also seemed to sense something as her eyes widened slightly, and she quickly withdrew her hand. "Thank you," Ethan murmured, his mind still in turmoil. What's your name?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Sophia," she replied after a brief hesitation. "Sophia Johnson." Sophia, not Mariana. Ethan felt a mix of disappointment and relief. Of course, it couldn't be her. It was just a cruel coincidence, a trick of fate. "Nice to meet you, Sophia," he said, forcing a smile. "I'm Ethan Thompson." Something flickered in her eyes upon hearing the name, a shadow of recognition quickly replaced by confusion. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thompson," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan paid for the bouquet, leaving a generous tip that made Sophia's eyes widen. He knew he should leave, return to his life of meetings and contracts, but his feet seemed glued to the floor. "Forgive me if I seem rude," he began, knowing he was about to cross a line. "But you remind me of someone I knew a long time ago." Sophia tilted her head, a gesture so familiar it made Ethan's heart ache. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but I don't recall meeting you before," she said, her voice soft but firm. "No, of course not," Ethan hurried to say. "It was just an impression. I apologize." He turned to leave, feeling simultaneously relieved and devastated. He was about to take the first step when Sophia's voice stopped him. "Mr. Thompson." Ethan turned, his heart racing again. "Yes?" Sophia seemed to be wrestling with something internally, her eyes reflecting a battle Ethan couldn't comprehend. I don't know why, but I feel like I should tell you this. I don't remember much of my past. I had an accident a few years ago and, well, there are many things that just aren't there." The words hit Ethan like a bolt of lightning. He felt the world spin around him, their implications echoing in his mind. An accident. Lost memories. Could it be... "I'm sorry to hear that, Sophia," he managed to say, his voice barely masking his emotion. "I hope one day you can recover your memories." Sophia nodded, a sad smile on her lips. "I hope so too, Mr. Thompson. I hope so too." With one last look, Ethan finally managed to force himself to leave the store. As he walked back to his office, the bouquet of red roses firmly in his hands, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He knew he should let it go, move on as he had done for the past 20 years. But something inside him had awakened, a long dormant flame that now burned with renewed intensity. Ethan Thompson, the successful businessman, the man who had it, all suddenly found himself facing a mystery that could change his life forever. And he knew deep in his heart that he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth about Sophia Johnson, the florist who was the living image of his lost love. Ethan could barely focus for the rest of the day. Sitting in his luxurious office, at the top of one of the most imposing skyscrapers in New York, he found himself staring at the bouquet of red roses he had bought from Sophia. Each petal seemed to whisper secrets of a long-buried past, teasing him with possibilities he hardly dared to consider. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice of his secretary, Emily Davis, brought him back to reality. "Mr. Oliveira is here for the 4 p.m. meeting." Ethan blinked, trying to compose himself. "Ah, yes, of course. Send him in, Emily." As his partner entered the room, Ethan made a conscious effort to focus on the business at hand. After all, Thompson Construction hadn't become an empire by chance. It had taken years of dedication, relentless focus, and tough decisions to get there. Yet, even as they discussed multi-million-dollar projects and expansion strategies, Ethan's mind kept drifting back to that small flower shop on Fifth Avenue, to Sophia's face, so familiar and yet a complete mystery. By the end of the meeting, it was already night. Ethan dismissed Emily and stayed alone in his office, the city lights twinkling outside like a sea of earthly stars. He stood up and walked to the large window, his reflection in the glass superimposed on the urban landscape. "What are you doing, Ethan?" he murmured to himself. "You've built all this, overcome so much. Are you going to throw it all away because of a resemblance?" But deep down, he knew it wasn't just a resemblance. It was more than that. It was as if the universe had decided to give him a second chance, an opportunity to unravel a mystery that could change everything. With a deep sigh, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Hello?" a sleepy voice answered on the other end of the line. "Michael, it's Ethan. Ethan Thompson." There was a pause, followed by the sound of someone shifting. "Ethan, my God, it's been so long. What's wrong? Is everything okay?" Michael had been his best friend in college before life took them down different paths. Now he was a respected private detective, known for his discretion and efficiency. "Sorry to call so late, my friend," Ethan said, his voice betraying his anxiety. I need your help. It's a delicate matter." "Of course, go ahead. What's going on?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, knowing that once he put it into words, there would be no turning back. "I think I found Sophia." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, Ethan could practically hear the gears turning in Michael's mind. "Ethan," Michael finally spoke, his voice heavy with concern. "You know that's impossible, right? We were both there when—" I know," Ethan interrupted, running a hand through his graying hair. "But Michael, you have to believe me, I saw her today. Well, not exactly her, but a woman who looks just like her. Her name is Sophia Johnson, and she works at a flower shop on Fifth Avenue. And the strangest part is she said she lost some of her memories in an accident." There was another moment of silence, and Ethan could imagine his friend processing all of this information. "Look, Ethan," Michael finally said, his voice softer now. "I understand this must have been a shock for you, but you need to consider the possibility that it's just an incredible coincidence. Grief can play tricks on us sometimes." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his friend's words. "I know it sounds crazy, Michael. Believe me, I've told myself the same thing, but there's something more here. I can feel it. I need to find out the truth, even if it's just to prove myself wrong." There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "All right, Ethan, I'll look into this Sophia Johnson for you, but promise me one thing. Don't do anything rash, okay? Let me do my job first." "Thank you, Michael. You don't know how much this means to me." After hanging up, Ethan turned his attention to the city outside. Somewhere among those millions of lights was Sophia, and with her, perhaps, the answers he had been searching for so long. The next day, Ethan woke up before sunrise, his mind still restless from the events of the previous day. He dressed mechanically, opting for a grey suit that Sophia always said matched his eyes. The thought made him pause for a moment, looking at his reflection in the mirror. Was he going crazy? Or had fate really decided to give him a second chance? Arriving at the office earlier than usual, Ethan found Emily already at her desk, as always. Her efficiency was one of the reasons he had kept her as his personal assistant for over a decade. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she greeted him, handing him a perfectly prepared cup of coffee. "You have a video conference with the Chinese investors at 9 a.m., followed by a meeting with the marketing team to discuss the campaign for the new project?" Ethan nodded distractedly, his mind still on the flower shop on Fifth Avenue. "Emily," he said suddenly, "could you do some research for me? I need information about a flower shop called, well, actually, I don't know the name. It's on Fifth Avenue near number 1500. Emily raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. That was another reason Ethan valued her so much. "Of course, sir. I'll start the search right away." The hours dragged on as Ethan tried to focus on his daily responsibilities. The video conference with the Chinese investors was particularly challenging, with Ethan having to make a conscious effort to stay focused on the negotiations. Around noon, Emily entered his office with a folder in hand. "Mr. Thompson, I found the information you requested about the flower shop." Ethan felt his heart race. "Thank you, Emily. What did you find out?" "The shop is called Garden of Memory," she began, consulting her notes. "It was opened about 3 years ago by a woman named Sophia Johnson. There isn't much information available about the owner, but the shop has good online reviews and seems well established in the local community." "Garden of Memories," Ethan murmured, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The name felt almost like a taunt from fate. "Is there anything else you'd like me to look into?" Emily asked, her voice professional, but with a hint of curiosity. Ethan hesitated for a moment. Part of him wanted to dive headfirst into this investigation to uncover everything he could about Sophia Johnson, but Michael's voice echoed in his mind, advising caution. "No, that's enough for now, Emily. Thank you." When she left, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The name of the flower shop, Garden of Memories, seemed almost too poetic to be a coincidence. It was as if the universe was sending him a signal, a clue to follow. He picked up his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing Michael's number. His friend answered on the second ring. "Ethan, I knew you'd call. I have some preliminary information for you." "Already?" Ethan asked, surprised by his friend's efficiency. "Yes, but it's not much," Michael warned. "Sophia Johnson appeared in New York about 3 years ago. Before that, there's practically no record of her. It's as if she just appeared out of nowhere." Ethan felt his heart leap. That lines up with what she told me about losing her memories in an accident. Exactly, Michael agreed. But Ethan, that doesn't prove anything. Thousands of people have accidents and lose their memories every year. It doesn't necessarily mean she's... I know, Ethan interrupted, running a hand over his face. But you have to admit, it's one hell of a coincidence. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Look, Ethan, Michael finally said, his voice soft. I understand this is important to you. I'll keep investigating, but please be careful. I don't want to see you get hurt again. Ethan nodded, even though he knew his friend couldn't see him. Thank you, Michael, I'll try. After hanging up, Ethan stood by the window of his office, gazing at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, Sophia Johnson was living her life, completely unaware of the storm she had stirred in his. At that moment, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't just sit and wait for the answers to come to him. He needed to act, to uncover the truth for himself. With renewed determination, he grabbed his jacket and left the office, ignoring the surprised looks from his employees. As he rode the elevator down, his heart pounded in his chest. He knew he was about to embark on a journey that could change everything, for better or worse. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back. The mystery of Sophia Johnson and the Garden of Memories had completely captivated him. And Ethan was determined to unravel it, no matter the cost. As he walked toward Fifth Avenue, Ethan couldn't help but feel that each step was taking him not only closer to Sophia, but also back to his past, to Olivia, and to everything he had lost 20 years ago. It was time to face his ghosts and perhaps find a chance at redemption. Ethan's heart raced as he approached the Garden of Memories. The small flower shop, nestled among the towering buildings of Fifth Avenue, seemed almost out of place, like a fragment of a dream intruding on the concrete reality of the metropolis. He stopped across the street, watching the activity in the shop. Customers came and went, carrying colorful bouquets and potted plants. And there she was, Sophia, arranging a display in the window, just like the day before. Her focused face, the way she lightly bit her lower lip as she worked, every gesture was a stab to Ethan's heart, so painfully familiar. Taking a deep breath, he crossed the street. The sound of the bell on the door made Sophia look up, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But it was so brief, he might have imagined it. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," Sophia greeted him with a gentle smile. "Here for more roses." Ethan felt his throat go dry. "Actually, I came to talk to you if that's not a bother." Sophia seemed surprised, but nodded. "Of course, no problem. Just a moment while I finish with this customer." As he waited, Ethan looked around the shop. It was a cozy space filled with colors and scents. His eyes were drawn to a small painting on the wall behind the counter. It was a depiction of a garden, with a couple walking hand in hand among the flowers. Something about that image made his heart ache. "All set, Mr. Thompson." Sophia's voice brought him back to the present. "How can I help you?" Ethan hesitated, realizing he hadn't really planned what to say. "Sophia, I couldn't help but notice yesterday that you mentioned losing some of your memories." Sophia's smile faltered for a moment. "Ah, yes. It was a difficult period. I'm sorry if I'm being intrusive," Ethan quickly said, "but this intrigued me. Would you mind telling me more about it?" Sophia studied him for a moment, as if assessing his intentions. Finally, she sighed and gestured toward a small table at the back of the shop. "Why don't we sit down? It's a bit of a long story." As they settled in, Ethan noticed Sophia's hands trembling slightly. He resisted the urge to hold those hands, to comfort her as he had done with Sophia so many years ago. "I was in a car accident about 3 years ago," Sophia began, her voice low and controlled. "When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't remember anything. My name, my family, my past, everything was gone." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "That must have been terrible." Sophia nodded, her eyes distant. "It was like being born, again, but with an adult body and a void where a lifetime of memories should have been. The doctors said it was retrograde amnesia caused by the trauma." "And you never recovered any memories?" Ethan asked, leaning forward, eager for every detail. Some flashes sometimes, Sophia replied, furrowing her brow. But nothing concrete. Sometimes I feel like I'm on the verge of remembering something important, but then it slips away. Ethan felt his heart race. Could it be possible? Could Sophia really be... "And your family?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Did no one come looking for you?" A shadow passed over Sophia's face. "No. The hospital's social workers tried to locate someone, but nothing. It was as if I had never existed before that accident." Ethan fought the urge to tell her everything. Right then, to say that maybe he knew who she was, that maybe she was the woman he had loved and lost so long ago. But the voice of reason, which sounded oddly like Michael's, stopped him. He couldn't just dump this on her without being sure. "How did you end up here?" he asked instead, looking around the flower shop. A small smile appeared on Sophia's lips. "That's interesting. When I left the hospital with no memories and nowhere to go, I wandered the streets of the city. One day I passed by a flower shop and something stirred in me. The scent of the flowers, the colors. It was like a dormant part of my brain had been awakened. I knew, instinctively, the name of every flower, how to care for them. It was the first thing that made sense since the accident." Ethan felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Sophia had always loved flowers. Her apartment was always full of them, and she spent hours tending to the small garden on the balcony. "So you decided to open your own shop," he concluded, his voice hoarse. Sophia nodded. "It took a while. First I worked at other flower shops, saved every penny. But yes, eventually I managed to open the Garden of Memories. It's funny, you know. I chose that name because flowers helped me build new memories when the old ones were gone. But sometimes I wonder if it's also a hope. A hope that one day, among these petals and scents, I might find a piece of my lost past." Ethan felt tears forming in his eyes and blinked quickly to push them away. Sophia's story was both heartbreaking and full of hope, and every word only reinforced his certainty that there was more to this story than a simple coincidence. "Sophia," he began hesitantly, "I know this might sound strange, but have you ever considered the possibility that someone from your past might be looking for you?" Her eyes widened slightly. I've tried not to think too much about that. It's too painful to imagine that there might be people out there who loved me, who missed me, and I don't even remember them." Ethan felt his heart break. He wanted to hug her, tell her it was okay, that he had found her. But he knew he couldn't, not yet. "I understand," he said softly. "But maybe it's time to start looking for some answers." Sophia looked at him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Thompson? Why are you so interested in my story?" Ethan knew he was reaching a critical point. What he said now could change everything. He took a deep breath, preparing to respond, when the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of a customer. Sophia quickly stood up. "I'm sorry, I need to..." Of course. Ethan nodded, feeling both relieved and frustrated by the interruption. As Sophia attended to the customer, Ethan stood up, his mind spinning with everything he had discovered. He knew he needed to be careful, that he couldn't just dump his suspicions on Sophia. But he also knew he could no longer ignore the possibility that she might really be Mariana. When Sophia returned, Ethan had already made a decision. "Sophia, I'd like to help you," he said. "To discover more about your past, I mean. I have some contacts, people who could investigate further." Sophia stared at him, clearly surprised by the offer. "But why? You barely know me." Ethan felt his heart tighten. If only she knew. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to lose someone important. If I could have a chance to get that person back, as well, I'd do anything." For a moment, Sophia seemed to struggle with an emotion Ethan couldn't decipher. Finally, she nodded slowly. I think I'd like that." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Please, call me Ethan." When he left the flower shop a few minutes later, Ethan felt as if he were walking on a tightrope. On one side, the dizzying hope of having found Sophia. On the other, the paralyzing fear of being wrong, of projecting his desires onto a stranger who happened to resemble his lost love. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. Ethan was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As he walked back to his office, he grabbed his phone and dialed Michael's number. "Michael, it's me. We need to step up our investigation. I think we're close to something big." On the other end of the line, Michael sighed. "Ethan, what exactly have you found?" "Everything," Ethan replied, his voice trembling with emotion. "And nothing, but I promise to tell you everything. Can we meet tonight?" As he finalized the details with Michael, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of a discovery that would change his life forever. The garden of memories had planted seeds of hope in his heart, and he was determined to see them bloom no matter what fate had in store for him. The nostalgic cafe, a small establishment in the heart of Chinatown, was the perfect spot for discreet meetings. Ethan arrived first, choosing a table in the back, far from prying ears. The aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft notes of jazz playing in the background. As he waited for Michael, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. Every detail of their earlier conversation echoed in his mind, every expression and gesture of hers etched into his memory. It was as if the universe were playing a cruel joke on him, presenting him with a woman identical to Sophia, but without the memories that bound them together. "Hi, Ethan." Michael's familiar voice pulled him from his reverie. "It's been a while since we met like this." Ethan stood up to greet his friend with a tight hug. Michael looked older than Ethan remembered, with streaks of gray at his temples and more pronounced lines around his eyes. But his gaze still held that mix of sharpness and compassion that made him an excellent detective. "Thanks for coming, Michael," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I know you must be busy." Michael waved his hand dismissively as he sat down. "For you, I always have time. Besides, I have to admit, I'm intrigued by this case. It's not every day that an old friend calls saying he might have found someone who should be, well, you know." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of that reality. For 20 years, he had lived with the certainty that Sophia was dead. Now, that certainty was being shaken to its core. "So," Michael began, leaning forward, "tell me everything you've found." Ethan took a deep breath and began recounting his conversation with Sophia. Every detail she had shared about her lost past, the accident, the amnesia. Michael listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook. "That's quite a story," Michael commented when Ethan finished. "But Ethan, you have to understand that this still doesn't prove anything. Coincidences happen." I know, Ethan said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "But Michael, you didn't see her. It's not just her appearance. It's her mannerisms, the way she talks about flowers. It's exactly like Sophia." Michael sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I get what you're feeling, but we have to be careful here. If this woman really is Sophia, we need to figure out why she disappeared, why she was declared dead. And if she's not, well, we need to be careful not to create false hope." Ethan nodded, knowing his friend was right. "What did you find in your investigation?" Michael picked up his tablet, swiping his finger across the screen. "Well, like I said before, there aren't many records of Sophia Johnson before 3 years ago. No school history, no previous jobs, no medical records except for the accident. It's like she just appeared out of nowhere. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" Ethan asked, feeling a mix of hope and apprehension. "Of course it does," Michael replied, "but it could also mean a lot of things. She could be an illegal immigrant, someone running from a troubled past, or just someone who changed her identity for personal reasons." Ethan shook his head, frustrated. "But what about the accident? There must be records of that, right?" Michael nodded. "Yes, I found the police report. A car accident on Interstate 95 just over 3 years ago, and unidentified. A woman was found unconscious at the scene. No documents, no identification. And the other car, the other driver. That's the intriguing part," Michael said, furrowing his brow. "There was no other car. Apparently the vehicle Sophia was in veered off the road on its own, flipped several times. But here's the strange part. The car was registered under a shell company, I tried to trace it, but it led nowhere. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Michael, this doesn't sound like a simple accident. No, it doesn't, Michael agreed, his expression serious. Ethan, what exactly happened on the day Sophia? Well, on the day of her accident. Ethan closed his eyes, memories of that terrible day flooding his mind. I wasn't there, remember? I was on a business trip in Washington, D.C. I got a call from the hospital saying Sophia had been in a serious accident. When I got there, they told me she hadn't made it. Did you see the body? Michael asked softly. Ethan opened his eyes, staring at his friend with a mix of shock and realization. No, he whispered. The doctor said that it was better. I didn't see. That the accident had been very severe. I was so devastated that I didn't even question it. Michael placed a comforting hand on Ethan's arm. Buddy, I don't want to give you false hope, but I think we need to dig deeper into what really happened 20 years ago. Ethan nodded, feeling both terrified and determined. Where do we start? Well, first we need to get more information about Sophia's accident, Michael said, shifting into professional mode. I'll try to access the medical records from the hospital where she was treated. I'll also look deeper into that shell company that owned the car. And me? Ethan asked, eager to help. Michael studied him for a moment. Ethan, I know this is hard, but I need you to keep your distance from Sophia for now. We can't risk scaring her or alerting whoever might be behind all of this. Ethan wanted to protest, but he knew Michael was right. All right, he reluctantly agreed, but keep me updated on everything, please. Of course, Michael promised. And Ethan? Try not to get too carried away by this. We still don't know anything for sure. As they left the cafe, Ethan felt as though he was standing on the edge of an abyss. On one side, the dizzying possibility of having Sophia back in his life. On the other, the paralyzing fear of chasing a ghost, an illusion created by his lonely heart. Back at his apartment, Ethan couldn't sleep. He spent hours rummaging through old boxes, searching for photos, letters, anything that could help unravel the mystery. In a dusty box, he found a photo album he hadn't seen in years. With trembling hands, he opened it. There they were, young and in love. Sophia smiling at the camera, her eyes sparkling with joy and promises of a future together. Ethan felt hot tears streaming down his cheeks as he gently ran his fingers over the image. Where have you been all this time, my love? He whispered to the photo. And if it's really you, why don't you remember me? That night, as the city slept outside, Ethan Thompson made a silent promise. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. If Sophia was truly Sophia, he would bring her back. And if she wasn't, well, he would have to learn to say goodbye once more. With that determination burning in his chest, Ethan finally fell asleep, dreaming of gardens of lost and found memories, where red roses bloomed, amidst long-buried secrets. The days that followed were torture for Ethan. Every minute seemed to drag, weighed down by the burden of expectation and uncertainty. He found himself constantly glancing at his phone, waiting for news from Michael, fighting the almost irresistible urge to run to the flower shop and see Sophia again. At work, Ethan struggled to keep up appearances. Meetings, contracts, important decisions, everything seemed trivial compared to the mystery consuming him. Emily, always attentive, noticed her boss's distraction but wisely kept her observations to herself. It was on Wednesday, almost a week after his encounter with Michael, that the phone finally rang. Ethan, it's me. Michael's voice sounded tense. We need to talk in person. Can you meet me at Central Park in an hour? Ethan's heart raced. Of course, I'll be there. Michael, did you find something? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yes, but it's not something we can discuss over the phone. Just come. The trip to the park was a blur for Ethan. His mind buzzed with possibilities, hopes and fears, swirling in a whirlwind of emotions. When he finally spotted Michael, sitting on a bench near the lake, Ethan had to restrain himself from running to him. Michael, he gasped, sitting down beside his friend. What did you find? Michael looked around, as if checking to make sure they weren't being watched, before turning to Ethan with a grave expression. "Ethan, what I'm about to tell you is complicated and potentially dangerous." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Michael took a deep breath before beginning. "I managed to access Sophia's medical records. What I found, well, it's at the very least intriguing. First, the type of brain injury she suffered is consistent with induced trauma, not just a regular car accident." "Induced?" Ethan repeated, horrified. "You mean intentional?" Michael nodded grimly. "Exactly, but that's not all. While investigating Sophia's accident, I started noticing patterns, similarities with other cases. Cases of people who simply disappeared, only to reappear years later with no memory." Ethan felt his stomach churn. "What are you suggesting, Michael?" "I'm suggesting," Michael said, lowering his voice, "that there might be something bigger going on here, something organized. And Ethan, I found connections that lead directly to Thompson Construction." The world seemed to spin around Ethan. "My company? But how? Why?" Michael placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "I don't have all the answers yet, but Ethan, do you remember any project, any business your father was involved in around the time Grace disappeared?" Ethan furrowed his brow, straining his memory. "My father, he was negotiating a major contract with the government, something about a building complex in Brasilia. But what does that have to do with—" "I'm not sure yet," Michael interrupted, "but I found records of suspicious transfers of large sums of money at the time, and more recently, over the past 3 years, similar patterns have started to reappear." Ethan felt as if the ground was opening beneath his feet. The idea that his own company, the company his father had built, could be involved in something so sinister was almost unbearable. "Michael," he said, his voice trembling, "are you suggesting that my father, that he could be involved in Sophia's disappearance?" The detective hesitated for a moment before responding. "Ethan, I don't want to accuse anyone without concrete evidence, but the evidence points to Thompson Construction being involved in something much bigger and much darker than we imagined." Ethan stood up abruptly, unable to stay seated. He walked to the edge of the lake, his reflection in the water seeming like a stranger to him. How had his life changed so drastically in just a week? "What do we do now?" he asked without turning around. Michael joined him at the edge of the lake. "We need to be very careful from here on out. If we're dealing with what I suspect, powerful people could be involved. People who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who threatened to expose them." Ethan turned to face his friend, a fierce determination in his eyes. "I don't care about the danger, Michael. If Grace is really Sophia, if my father, if he's really involved in this, I need to know. I need to make this right." Michael studied his friend for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but we'll do this the right way. We need more evidence. We need to fully understand what we're up against before we act." "And Grace?" Ethan asked, his heart tightening at the thought of her. "Should we tell her?" "Not yet," Michael replied firmly. "Not until we're sure. Imagine the trauma it would be for her to find out something like this if it's not true. Or worse, if it is true and the people behind it find out she knows." Ethan knew Michael was right, but the idea of keeping Grace in the dark deeply troubled him. "So what's the next step?" "I'll keep investigating, following the money trail," Michael explained. "In the meantime, I need you to do something potentially difficult." "What?" "I need you to act normally, go to work, manage the company as usual, but stay alert. Watch your father, the senior executives, anything out of the ordinary, any suspicious conversations, let me know immediately." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. The idea of pretending everything was normal while suspecting that his own father might be involved in something so terrible was nauseating, but he knew he had no choice. "All right," he reluctantly agreed. "I'll do whatever it takes." As they said their goodbyes, Ethan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He glanced once more at the lake, its calm waters contrasting with the storm raging inside him. Somewhere beyond that peaceful park lay the answers he sought. and Ethan swore to himself that he would find them no matter the cost. Back at his apartment, Ethan sat in his office surrounded by family photos and business awards. Everything he thought he knew, everything he valued, seemed to be crumbling around him. He picked up a photo of his father, taken on the day Ethan Say officially took over as president of Thompson Construction. "Why, Dad?" he whispered to the smiling image. "What did you do?" That night, as the city outside continued its relentless routine, Ethan Thompson stayed awake, his world torn between the man he always thought he was and the man he needed to become to uncover the truth. Somewhere, between the shadows of the past and the uncertainties of the future, lay the answers that could reunite two hearts separated by 20 years of lies and secrets. With renewed determination, Ethan began planning his next moves. He knew the path ahead would be dangerous, that each step would take him deeper into a maze of deceit and betrayal. But at the center of that maze was Sophia, and the promise of a love that not even time and conspiracy had managed to erase. As the night wore on, Ethan made a silent promise to the stars shining outside. He would uncover the truth, dismantle the conspiracy, and, if fate allowed, reclaim the love that had been stolen from him. No matter the cost, no matter who he had to face, even if it was his own father. Dawn found Ethan still awake, his eyes tired but determined. A new day was beginning, and with it, the first step of a journey that promised to change everything. Ethan Thompson, the successful businessman, was about to become something more. A man in search of truth, justice, and a love lost in time. The next morning, Ethan entered the imposing building of Thompson Construction with a knot in his stomach. The place that had always been his refuge, his pride, now felt like a minefield of secrets and potential betrayals. Every familiar face, employees greeting him with respectful smiles, now carried the shadow of doubt. Who else might be involved? Who knew the truth? When he reached the executive floor, Ethan was greeted by Emily, who immediately noticed something different about her boss. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Is everything all right? You seem worried." Ethan forced a smile. "I'm fine, Emily. Just a rough night. Any updates?" "Yes, your father called. He wants to see you for lunch today. He said it's important." Ethan's heart raced. His father rarely called for last-minute lunches. Was it a coincidence, or was it related to Michael's investigation? "Thank you, Emily. Please confirm the lunch." Entering his office, Ethan closed the door and took a deep breath. He needed to focus, to act normally. He turned on his computer and began reviewing emails, but his mind was elsewhere. Images of Sophia, memories of Sophia, and now suspicions about his own father swirled together in a whirlwind of emotions. At 12:30 p.m., Ethan went down to the building's garage, where his driver was waiting for him. The ride to his father's favorite restaurant, an elegant establishment in Beverly Hills, was silent. Ethan mentally rehearsed how to act, what to say, how to observe without raising suspicions. William Thompson was already seated when Ethan arrived. At 70 years old, the patriarch of the Thompson family still exuded an aura of power and authority that made those around him seem diminished. "Ethan, my son," William greeted him with a warm smile, standing up for a hug. "It's good to see you could make it." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. This was the man who raised him, who taught him everything about business, who always seemed to put family above all else. Could he really be involved in something so sinister? "Of course, Dad," Ethan replied, returning the hug. "You know I always have time for you." They sat down and placed their orders. The conversation initially revolved around trivial matters, the weather, politics, the company's latest projects. Ethan watched every expression, every gesture of his father closely, searching for any sign of nervousness or guilt. It was only after the main course arrived that William got to the point. "Ethan," he began, his tone suddenly serious, "there's something important we need to discuss. Something about the future of the company." Ethan felt his heart race. "What is it, Dad?" William took a sip of wine before continuing. "I've received an offer, a merger with the Carter Group. They're offering a considerable sum, and I believe it's a unique opportunity for us to expand our horizons." Ethan frowned. The Carter Group was known for its aggressive business practices and rumors of questionable political connections. Dad, you know we've always been against this kind of merger. Our independence has always been our greatest strength. Times change, son, William replied, a strange glint in his eyes. Sometimes, to survive, we need to adapt, make strategic alliances. The choice of words didn't escape Ethan. Alliances? Dad, what's really going on here? William sighed, suddenly looking older and more tired. Ethan, there are things about the business, about our family, that you don't know. Things I've done to protect everything we've built. Ethan's blood ran cold. Was it possible that his father was about to confess? He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. What things, Dad? What have you done? For a moment it seemed like William was about to open up completely. But then, as if he had thought better of it, he composed himself. Nothing illegal if that's what you're thinking, just tough decisions, necessary compromises. Ethan felt a mix of frustration and relief. His father hadn't confessed anything concrete, but it was clear there was more to the story than he was willing to reveal. Dad, Ethan said carefully, you know you can trust me, right? Whatever it is, we can face it together. William studied his son for a long moment before responding. I know, Ethan, and that's why I need you to trust me now. This merger is important, more important than you can imagine. The rest of lunch passed in a tense atmosphere. When they finally said goodbye, Ethan felt as though he were drifting, away from his father, not just physically but emotionally as well. The chasm of secrets between them seemed wider than ever. Back at the office, Ethan could barely concentrate. He picked up the phone several times to call Michael, but always hesitated at the last moment. What exactly would he say? That his father was acting suspiciously? That he had hinted at having secrets but revealed nothing concrete? By late afternoon, unable to endure the confines of his office any longer, Ethan decided to take a walk. His feet carried him almost unconsciously in the direction of Fifth Avenue. Before he knew it, he was standing in front of the Garden of Memories. Through the window he could see Sophia arranging a vase of lilies. She looked so serene, so oblivious to the storm her mere existence had unleashed. For a moment, Ethan was overcome by an overwhelming desire to go inside, to tell her everything, to beg her to remember. But Michael's words echoed in his mind. It was too dangerous for her, for him, for the investigation. With a heavy heart, Ethan forced himself to walk away. That night in his apartment, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony looking out at the illuminated city, feeling more alone than ever. On one side, his father and the shadowy secrets of Thompson Construction. On the other, Sophia and the promise of a rediscovered love. And in the middle, himself, torn between loyalty and truth, between the past and the future. As the early hours of the morning crept in, Ethan made a decision. He could no longer stand, still, waiting for the answers to come to him. It was time to act, to actively seek the truth no matter where it led him. With the first light of dawn, Ethan picked up his phone and typed a message to Michael. We need to speed up the investigation. I think my father is about to do something big. We don't have much time. After sending the message, Ethan prepared to face the new day. He knew he was about to dive deeper into the turbulent waters of his family's secrets and his own past. But he also knew that somewhere in those depths were the answers he so desperately sought. And perhaps, just perhaps, the chance for a new beginning with the woman he had never stopped loving. With renewed determination, Ethan braced himself for what would undoubtedly be the greatest challenge of his life. The game of masks and mirrors was about to intensify, and he was determined not to lose sight of the truth, no matter how distorted it might seem. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Ethan. During the day, he navigated the corporate world with a mask of normalcy, attending meetings, reviewing contracts, and feigning interest in the merger proposal. At night, he secretly met with Michael, dissecting every new piece of information, every clue the detective managed to uncover. It was on one of those nights, in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city, that Michael presented Ethan with a disturbing discovery. I found something, Michael said, his voice low and tense. He slid a brown envelope across the table. Records from a private, very exclusive clinic on the outskirts of New York, specializing in neurological rehabilitation. Ethan opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were copies of medical records, satellite photos of an isolated property, and a list of names. His eyes widened as he recognized some of them. "These are politicians? Businessmen?" he murmured, incredulous. Michael nodded grimly. "Apparently this clinic doesn't just handle legitimate medical cases. There are indications that it's used to reprogram people, erase memories, create new identities." Ethan felt his stomach churn. "And you think Sophia... I'm not sure yet," Michael interrupted gently. "But there's a record of a patient admitted about 3 years ago that matches Sophia's description. And Ethan, the name listed as the admitting party is William Thompson." The world seemed to spin around Ethan, his own father. How could he have done something like this? Why? "We need more evidence," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "We need to get inside that clinic, see it with our own eyes." Michael frowned. "Ethan, this is extremely dangerous. We're talking about a highly sophisticated and well-protected operation. If we're caught..." "I don't care about the risks," Ethan interrupted, a fierce determination in his eyes. "If there's a chance to uncover the truth about Sophia, about all of this, we have to try." After hours of discussion and planning, they finally reached an agreement. Michael would use his contacts to arrange an official visit to the clinic, disguised as a health inspector. Ethan, on the other hand, would have an even more delicate task, confronting his father. The next morning, Ethan arrived early at the office. He knew his father was always the first to arrive, a routine he had maintained for decades. With a heavy heart, he knocked on William's office door. "Ethan?" His father seemed surprised to see him. "What are you doing here so early?" Ethan closed the door behind him, facing the man who had raised him. "Dad, we need to talk about the truth." William furrowed his brow. "What are you talking about?" "About Sophia," Ethan said, carefully observing his father's reaction. "About what really happened 20 years ago." For a moment, William seemed genuinely confused. Then, slowly, a mask of understanding and resignation fell over his face. "Ah, Ethan," he sighed, suddenly looking very old. "I always knew this day would come. Sit down, son, it's a long story." In the hours that followed, William Thompson unraveled a web of secrets, lies, and impossible decisions that spanned decades. He spoke of political pressures, veiled threats, and a corporate empire built on dark alliances. "You have to understand, Ethan," William pleaded, tears in his eyes. "I had no choice. They threatened to destroy everything, the company, our family. Sophia, she discovered something she shouldn't have, something that could have ruined us all." Ethan felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. "So you sent her to that clinic, erased her memories?" William nodded sadly. "It was either that or, well, the alternatives were unthinkable. I thought I was protecting all of us, including you." "Protecting?" Ethan nearly shouted, decades of pain and anger finally overflowing. "You destroyed our lives. You stole 20 years from us." "I know," William said, his voice breaking, "and I live with that guilt every day. But Ethan, you have to understand, this is bigger than us. There are powerful people involved, people who wouldn't hesitate to..." At that moment, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. "Emergency. The clinic is being evacuated, they know." Ethan felt his blood run cold. He stood up abruptly, staring at his father with a mix of anger and desperation. "What did you do?" he demanded. William looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" But Ethan was already running for the door. He needed to get to the clinic, needed to find Sophia before it was too late. As he ran down the hallway, he heard his father shouting his name, but he didn't look back. In the parking lot, Ethan jumped into his car, his heart pounding frantically. As he sped through the streets of New York, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at his father, fear for what might happen to Sophia, and a fierce determination to finally uncover the whole truth. The drive to the clinic on the outskirts of the city felt endless. Ethan weaved through traffic, ignored red lights, driven only by the desperate urgency to get there in time. When he finally caught sight of the property gates, his heart nearly stopped. There was visible commotion. Cars leaving the premises in a hurry, people running, papers being hastily burned. Amid the chaos, Ethan spotted a familiar figure. Michael, still in his disguise, frantically waving at him. Ethan slammed on the brakes, jumping out of the car before it even came to a complete stop. "Michael, where is she? Did you see her?" The detective grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him away from prying eyes. "We're too late," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "They started evacuating minutes before I got here, but Ethan, I saw something. Or rather, someone." Ethan held his breath, both fearing and longing for the answer. "A woman," Michael continued, his eyes locked on Ethan's. "She looked exactly like the photos of Sophia you showed me. She was being led away by two men, seemed disoriented. I tried to get closer, but..." Ethan didn't wait to hear the rest. He lunged toward the clinic entrance, determined to find Anna, or Sophia, or whoever she was now. But before he could take more than a few steps, strong hands held him back. "Ethan, no!" Michael shouted, struggling to restrain him. "It's too late. If we go in there now, we'll expose ourselves. We need to be smart. We need to..." But Ethan barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on a car leaving through the clinic gates. For a brief moment, through the darkened window of the vehicle, he caught a glimpse of a face. The face that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. "Sophia!" he shouted, his voice filled with despair and hope. The car sped away, quickly disappearing down the road. Ethan fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. So close, and he had been so close. Michael knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's not over, Ethan," he said firmly. "Now we know the truth. We know she's alive, and we'll find her no matter the cost." As the sun set on the horizon, casting long shadows over the now nearly deserted property, Ethan slowly stood up. His face, though marked by pain and exhaustion, showed renewed determination. "You're right, Michael," he said, his voice low but steady. "This isn't over. In fact, it's only the beginning." Together, the two men walked back to Ethan's car. The battle for the truth and the reunion of two hearts separated by decades of lies and manipulation was far from over. But now, armed with the certainty that Sophia was alive and the determination to dismantle the conspiracy that had torn them apart, Ethan knew he wouldn't rest until she was back in his arms. The days following the discovery at the clinic were a whirlwind for Ethan. Every minute felt like a battle between the urgency to act and the need for caution. The glimpse of Sophia, or was it Anna, had reignited a flame in his heart, but it had also alerted him to the dangers surrounding them. Ethan barely slept, dividing his time between maintaining appearances at Thompson Construction and tirelessly working with Michael to unravel the mystery. The detective had managed to trace the car that had taken Sophia to a luxury apartment complex in Beverly Hills, but the security of the place made a direct approach nearly impossible. On a particularly frustrating afternoon, Ethan found himself wandering aimlessly through the streets of New York. His feet led him almost unconsciously to the flower shop Garden of Memories. The establishment was closed, a sign on the door reading, "Closed indefinitely." Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the display window, feeling a wave of emotions engulf him. Just a few weeks ago, he had reunited with the love of his life there without even realizing it, and now she had disappeared again. "Sir, are you okay?" The gentle voice startled him. Ethan turned and found himself face to face with an elderly woman carrying a shopping bag. "Ah, yes. I was just thinking," he stammered, embarrassed. The woman smiled understandingly. "You knew Anna, didn't you? Lovely girl. Always so kind to everyone in the neighborhood." Ethan's heart raced. "Yes, I knew her. Do you know where she went?" The elderly woman furrowed her brow, thoughtful. "Not exactly, but the day before she closed the shop, she seemed agitated. She mentioned something about memories returning, about needing to uncover the truth about her past." The woman paused as if remembering something. "Oh, and she had a visitor, an older man, very elegant. It seemed like they argued." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Could it be his father? Did you happen to hear what they were talking about? Not much, the woman replied, but I heard the name Sophia mentioned. Anna seemed very disturbed after that. Ethan thanked the woman, his mind spinning with the new information. He immediately called Michael, reporting what he had discovered. This changes everything, Michael said, his voice tense. If Anna was starting to remember, if your father confronted her. Ethan, we need to act fast. They might be planning to reprogram her again. The idea made Ethan's blood run cold. What can we do? I have a contact, Michael replied after a moment of hesitation. Someone who worked at the clinic. She might have information about the procedures, maybe even about where Sophia could be now. But Ethan, this is dangerous. Very dangerous. Ethan didn't hesitate. I don't care about the danger. Set up the meeting. That night at a discreet bar on the outskirts of the city, Ethan and Michael met with Grace, a former nurse from the clinic. The middle-aged woman with a frightened look spoke in whispers, constantly glancing over her shoulder. You have no idea what's going on, she began, her hands trembling around the glass of whiskey. The clinic. It's not just about erasing memories. It's about control. Control of powerful people, of dangerous information. Ethan leaned forward, his voice urgent. And Sophia? What do you know about her? Grace stared at him with wide eyes. Sophia, oh yes, the special case. She was brought in 20 years ago, young and beautiful, but unlike the others, she resisted the treatment. Her memories, they always found a way to come back. Ethan's heart raced. Even after 2 decades, even after everything they had done to her, Sophia was still fighting. She still remembered. That's why they brought her back recently, Grace continued. The memories were returning stronger. They were planning a more intense procedure. Where is she now? Michael asked, his voice tense. Grace hesitated, fear evident in her eyes. I shouldn't. They'll kill me if they find out. Ethan took her hands, his gaze intense. Please, I love her. I've lived without her for 20 years. Please, help me find her. Something in Ethan's desperation seemed to touch Grace. With a trembling sigh, she nodded. There's a country house on the outskirts of Aspen. That's where they take the special cases for more intensive treatments. She scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to Ethan. But please be careful. The people behind this, they'll do anything to keep their secrets. As soon as they left the bar, Ethan and Michael began to plan. They knew they were taking a risk, that they were about to face forces far beyond what they had imagined. But the prospect of finally rescuing Sophia, of dismantling this entire web of lies and manipulation, was stronger than any fear. The next morning, as he prepared for the journey to Aspen, Ethan received an unexpected call. It was his father. Ethan, William's voice sounded tired, defeated. I know what you're planning. Please don't do this. You don't understand the risks. No, Dad, Ethan replied, his voice steady. It's you who doesn't understand. I love her. I always have. And I'm going to bring her back, no matter the cost. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, William spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. Then go, but be careful. And Ethan, forgive me. For everything. As he hung up the phone, Ethan felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a pang of compassion for his father. But there was no time for hesitation. Sophia was waiting for him. With Michael by his side, Ethan set off toward Aspen. The winding road through the mountains seemed to symbolize the tortuous journey that had brought them there. Every curve, every steep climb, brought them closer to the final confrontation. When they finally caught sight of the secluded country house nestled among ancient pine trees, Ethan felt his heart race. Somewhere within that seemingly idyllic property was Sophia, and he was determined to bring her back, to reclaim the 20 years that had been stolen from them. As they parked the car at a safe distance and prepared for the final approach, Ethan made a silent promise. No matter what they found inside, no matter the obstacles they still had to face, he wouldn't give up. Because in the end, beyond all, the conspiracies and secrets, there was love. A love that had survived 2 decades of separation, lies, and manipulation. A love that Ethan was certain would be strong enough to overcome any challenge fate still had in store for them. The country house emerged among the pines like a fortress disguised as a pastoral retreat. Ethan and Michael watched from a distance, hidden in the dense vegetation, studying the movements of the guards patrolling the perimeter. "This isn't going to be easy," Michael murmured, adjusting his binoculars. "The security is heavy. Cameras, armed guards. This is more than just a simple retreat." Ethan nodded, his determination unwavering. "It doesn't matter. We've come too far to give up now." They waited until nightfall, when the lengthening shadows offered some cover. With calculated movements, avoiding the security cameras, they approached the house. Michael used his skills to disarm the alarm system on a side window, allowing them to slip inside silently. The interior of the house was a shocking contrast to its rustic exterior. Sterile hallways, security-coded doors, and an oppressive silence that made Ethan's heart tighten. What exactly was happening here? They moved cautiously, consulting the rudimentary map Grace had drawn for them. According to her, the special patients were kept in the basement. As they reached a staircase leading downward, they heard voices approaching. Quickly they hid in a supply closet.